Hello, everybody. Welcome to our exciting reveal for the London, Westminster, Middlesex Family History Society. We've been working on them as part of the most recent WikiTree challenge. We're excited to have Elizabeth here representing them today. And then we also have, let me pop Stephen back in here. I think we've got Jo Fitzhenry.
Hello.
She was our team captain and did an excellent job of that. And we have Hillary, who worked on quite a bit during the week. And we have Nick Donnelly and Stephen Shoeblood, who were two of our brick wall breakers this time, and they're here to share about their experiences. So we are excited to share. Elizabeth, can you just tell us a little bit about your society?
Yes, certainly. We're called the London, Westminster and Middlesex. I don't know how familiar everyone is with London, but it's a massive, huge, big place, and the genealogy is really complicated. We have 7 family history societies, I think it is, that cover London, the Greater London area. But our one covers the original city of London and the original city of Westminster, and those bits of Middlesex are sort of North London, I think we call it nowadays, going to Northwest London. So quite a large area and quite diverse, really.
That's great. Very good. Well, I think we'll jump right in because we have lots to share. We're going to just go down the list and show you some stuff and share how we found stuff and where we found stuff and all that. So let me share this. And we can start with Thomas Ancret.
Okay, so we had 7 profiles submitted by the Family History Society, which we actually whittled down to 6, and we'll explain why we did that as we went along. We've arranged them in alphabetical order. So Thomas Ancret, from the member who submitted them, said he's had an unconfirmed birth in St Giles in the Fields in Westminster in 1765, but no register entry was found. He was married in Walsall, Staffordshire, and buried at St James, Westminster in 1803, a graveyard which has now been dug up by the HS2 rail line. We know from a will that he had a wife, Sarah, and 2 sons under 21, and a friend, Joseph Rock, and was of St Giles of the Fields when he was married. He wasn't on the he wasn't himself on WikiTree as a profile when we started, but as soon as we actually put him on, we found that we could connect him by his wife, Sarah, to WikiTree's big tree via her second husband. And spoiler alert, this one was a broken brick wall. So I'd like to invite Nick to tell us how you broke the wall.
Sure, thanks, Jo. So I guess there were a couple of useful bits of information as a starting point, and they both related to Thomas's age. Because he was based in London and Westminster, and we know that a lot of people, they often migrated from other parts of England into London. So while we had the clue or the thought that perhaps he'd been born in St Giles Parish, as the member of the society had found, there didn't seem to be any records to suggest or confirm this. But we did have a good idea of his age, because when he was buried in 1803, the burial record recorded his age as 43 years, which is a fairly precise age. He was also relatively young, which tends to suggest that the age was probably fairly accurate. We also knew that he had stated himself that he was 30 years old or upwards when he applied for his marriage license in 1789. So those bits of information suggested that we were probably looking for someone who was born, baptised, somewhere around the period 1758 to 1760. But we expanded the search a bit wider because we do know that dates can often be, or ages, sorry, can often be fairly inaccurate. And that revealed 3 potential baptisms for Thomas. Interestingly, all 3 of the baptisms were in Shropshire, which seems to be the ancestral home of the Ancret family. There are a lot of them there. There was one in 1758, which was the one that best matched the age, but then there was another in 1763, another in 1754. So those were also reasonable possibilities. And at first glance, there was no real way to tell which, if any, of those 3 might be the correct baptism. So I took the approach of researching all 3 of the candidates, hoping that some of them might be able to be discounted because potentially would find other records relating to them that couldn't be for Thomas Ancret of St Giles. And that turned out to be the case. The 1763 baptism and the 1754 baptism, as I followed the lives of those people through, it seems that they both stayed in Shropshire, got married there, and also died there. So it seemed that those 2 could be discounted fairly clearly. They weren't the Thomas that we were interested in. When I researched the Thomas born in 1758, I couldn't find any record of him in Shropshire. So that did tend to suggest that he may have migrated. Also hadn't been able to find any burial records or anything that would suggest he had died young, because that, of course, is also a possibility in this era when a lot of people did die young. So he was still a candidate at that point. But just because he was the only remaining candidate didn't mean he was the right one. I also wanted to find some kind of positive evidence that might link this Thomas of Shropshire to Thomas of St Giles in the Fields. And so it really involved just following the life of the Thomas of St Giles and looking at friends, relatives, connections, really looking at any record I could find that pertained to him. And there were a few records that came up that tended to suggest that he was indeed the correct person. So in particular, there was a woman named Sarah Ancret who was married just a few miles away from where Thomas himself was married. And Thomas was the witness at this Sarah Ancret's wedding. She'd been married in 1783. Thomas himself had been married in 1789. And while there was no firm evidence of what the relationship would be, logically, it could well suggest that Thomas and Sarah were brother and sister. And I did notice that the Thomas baptised in 1758 did indeed have a sister named Sarah, who incidentally had also disappeared from the Shropshire records, suggesting that they may have both moved to the Walsall area or had connections to the Walsall area in any case. So that was an interesting bit of evidence. Another bit of evidence that we found was we looked at the baptisms of Thomas's children, which took place in the Catholic Sardinian Chapel in London. And those records, they were quite good. They named the godparents, as Catholic records often do. And so I thought the godparents might provide a clue as to the origins of Thomas. And so there was one godparent in particular who was a woman named Martha Ancret. So again, that's clearly some sort of relative, at least by marriage. So I thought trying to chase or trace the various Martha Ancrets that are around could prove fruitful. And having done that, and there were a few Martha Ancrets all based around Shropshire, but one in particular was a Martha Ancret who was the mother of the Thomas, who was born in 1758. Now, we know that this Martha, she was still living in the 1790s when the baptism occurred. She died in 1803. And we also found that she had been a witness to a Catholic baptism in Shrewsbury. So there was a Catholic connection there as well. Now, I should say that the baptism record I found in 1758, and indeed most of the records for the Ancret family were indeed Church of England, but Thomas and his family were Catholic. Sarah Rock, whom he had married, she came from a strong Catholic family, so he may have converted possibly around the time that he'd met her, and possibly they had influenced this Martha Ancret, who I was coming to believe must be his mother and who had been the godparent at the baptism of one of his children. So they were that connection there to Martha, and the fact that as I researched all the various options for who the Martha Ancret could be, the mother of the Thomas born 1758 was really the only one that fit as being reasonable for it. So essentially a combination of those pieces of evidence, the age, I would say it's not a 100% conclusion, but it's as close as we're going to get. It would be lovely to have a record, like an apprenticeship record that said Thomas, son of so-and-so from Shrewsbury. That would be really the icing on the cake. Because it's a circumstantial case, albeit I thought it was a pretty strong one, as we usually do on WikiTree, I posted it to the rest of our group, and a couple of members had a close look at it just to check that I wasn't being overly optimistic. We've probably all had the situation where you get really deep into the research and you're really wanting things to connect up, and it's easy to sort of lose a bit of sight of things. So we got that review, and other people agreed that it seemed like a reasonable case when you considered the totality of the evidence. No one piece of evidence would be enough to be making the connection, but it's really the whole argument in total does seem to provide a strong case. And so in that case, Thomas of St. Giles was actually Thomas of Shrewsbury, born 1758, to Arthur and Martha Ancret. One of the particular challenges with this family, I should say, is that the spelling of Ancret had a number of variations. I think I came across about 20 different variants, and that's not accounting for just some of the bad transcriptions. That was just in the actual images of the records themselves. So, a very interesting puzzle to try and solve. Really good fun. And I should say it certainly wasn't just me. I had, as Joe's already mentioned, a number of people tend to come out and work on different lines and help at various times, and there were absolutely other members who provided some really good help and ideas for this particular puzzle.
Thanks, Nick. That's brilliant. And we want to give shouts out here to a couple of people. So Helen Flight, who actually managed to connect Thomas up via a different route, not via his wife's second husband. And there's also sort of people who made lots of Ancret profiles to actually sort of like really bulk out their sort of like the 7 degrees of relationships. So I hope I'm not mangling Jay's name when I say Jay Manchaca, who's actually works from Mexico. So that was a long way out of his comfort zone. Paul Snook, Anne Browning, and Anita Meek all made lots of profiles to say bulk out the number of people that we actually had finally related to Thomas on WikiTree. We started off with 110 people who were within 7 degrees, and we finished up with 640, and actually found that Thomas had actually been hiding in plain sight on WikiTree with his birth spelling of Ancret all the time. So, so once Nick had worked out who he actually was, we just merged the two profiles together. So he's got, say, lots of relatives now that your member can go sort of like explore.
Thank
But
you very much.
we'll
Yeah,
talk.
that's really
We'll talk
interesting.
about the. I think Owen's got some lovely graphs and things later on showing sort of like how many degrees of relationships people have. Now, have we got Stephen back yet? Because I've lost him off my screen. That's good. Hello, Stephen. Could you hear us while we were talking about that?
I did hear most of it. Can you hear me?
I can, but you sound like a Dalek.
Oh, okay. I've got brilliant internet connection here, so I don't know why I'm playing up so badly. I do apologise.
Okay.
Shall I talk about Thomas Chambers?
Yes, I'll just give you a bit of a lead in. If you could do something to clean up your sound a bit, because it's
quite staticky.
Yeah.
Yeah, if it doesn't get better, I think you're going to have to do it without me. Sorry.
We can't do it without you. Let me give you your intro, and if it the static gets too bad, we will then go on to the next one in the list. Okay, so Thomas Chambers. Oh, that's better.
Yeah.
I think Stephen's just frozen though. So Thomas Chambers, from the member, says, my grandfather was born 1869 or 1870. He married Minnie Low Nee Pettifer in Paddington in 1912. He was age 42 at the time, a taxi driver, and he said his father was Thomas Chambers, a clerk. We found Thomas Chambers and Minnie in the 1921 census. They had 2 of their own children. They had 5 stepchildren. They had not Thomas had not previously had a profile on WikiTree, and he was unconnected. And Stephen actually managed to connect him in. Now we seem to have lost Stephen again now.
Yeah, he's gone. He's probably restarting his computer or something.
Okay.
We'll check back.
Which is a pity, because the work that Stephen did on this was absolutely amazing.
So great.
Yeah. As you can see, he's now got Thomas Chambers has now got a middle name and parents as well, but we need to. I think we really need Stephen to be able to talk this one through. So shall we just skip to the next one?
Yes. Our good friend Sydney Dyer.
Sydney, yes. Owen loves Sydney because he's got such a lovely beard.
His mustache.
So Sydney Dyer, I believe, was submitted by Karen Brown from your society, Elizabeth, because I found the same sort of fingerprints of her on Ancestry, and she'd already started this profile for him on WikiTree.
Yes, that's right. That was Karen. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, this is another broken wall. So for Karen said, the family story was that he was born 12th of September 1812, but she's never been able to find any evidence. Every census, he said he was born in Kennington, Surrey. And for people who aren't cognizant with how London is laid out, that is just south of the river near Lambeth, at the other end of the Vauxhall Bridge. He was always a carpenter and joiner. He had a known marriage, 1835, and he had 9 children. So he wasn't. He was on the on WikiTree, but he didn't have much of a fleshed out profile. And Karen had said he had a witness, Emma Dyer, at his wedding. Is this significant? And yes, Emma was the significant person here. I found the connection here and Emma definitely was the way in. So I looked for, assuming that she was a sister, I looked for her marriage. She had a very distinctive signature when she signed the register for Sydney. And so I looked in other marriage registers and found one that looked like hers, where an Emma Dyer had married a Richard Axton in 1847. And she gave her father as John Dyer, a gentleman. They don't get many Axtons to the pound in London. It's a very West Country name. He was a cheesemonger. His brother was a cheesemonger, and they worked out of Clerkenwell. So at the next census in 1851, she gave a very distinct place of birth as Charlotte Street in Fitzroy Square. From that, we could track her back to a baptism in 1821, St Giles in the Fields, where her father was John Dyer, an organ maker, and there were a host of other children that were her siblings there, and they lived in Brook Street most of the time, and there was a big organ making company on Brook Street that had been going since the 1760s. So John probably worked for those. So this cohort siblings in the St Giles Register goes back to about 1804. How many of them did I get in the end? Loads. I think there was about 12 of them in the end. 11. So I looked up in the British Newspaper Archive on Find My Past, searching for Dyer and Axtons, and didn't get anything relating to Sydney, but I did get a really bizarre story which is linked to one of these Dyer profiles, probably the brother George, where George Axtons in 1870 had walked into a police station in North London and confessed to killing a man in Australia 12 years previously. He said he'd come back to England and he'd stayed with his sister, Mrs. Axtons. So from that, we know that we have a brother, George. That still didn't link us up to Sydney. It wasn't until I started looking through the Axtons' children, and in June 1854, 2 of the Axtons' children had died of scarlatina. But also a Charlotte Dyer had died in the same house, and this was Sydney's daughter. And Sydney had gone and registered the children's deaths. So that seemed fairly conclusive that they were all siblings. Now, what I found really strange was that I had Sydney, I had George, who seemed to be, didn't have any baptism records. George, when he got married, had a Charlotte Dyer sign his register, and I haven't found a baptism record for her, but I think that they are all unbaptized siblings. I don't know where he's got this idea of he was born in Kennington, unless he was born in Kennington because his mum just went over there to be perhaps with her family, because I'm not sure who his mother actually is. And perhaps she went home, to be with mum or sister to have the baby, brought them back to Clerkenwell, and then they got baptised in Clerkenwell. Interestingly, Emma, after giving a very precise birthplace of Fitzroy Square in 1851, in 1871, she also says in the census that she's born in Kennington. Go figure. So that's our sort of like the breaking down of the brick wall there, really.
That's excellent. Well done. Karen will be delighted.
Karen has already found it, because I went back and looked on her ancestry tree earlier today, and all the information is now on there. So I know that she found it. I was hoping that she actually might be in this kind of Muppet Show, sort of like range of faces here.
Yeah, I know she's gone away for a few days, so I think that's
right. Okay, so we don't know who Sydney's mother actually is, but the name Lovett seemed very important to Sydney because he named his his second and his third children had the middle name Lovett. Emma Lovett, probably named for his sister, died young, and Karen hadn't got her. And then the eldest son, Sydney Lovett, and then he survived, and he stopped calling them Lovett after that. Sydney was an interesting man in that he registered his children meticulously, but he didn't baptize them. So there's other interesting backstories there. Emma's husband was made a bankrupt around the time that her two children died of scarlatina, which and the whole family seemed to fall apart a bit there. And then there's George, who, having confessed to the murder of this man in Australia, was promptly sent back to Australia to stand trial, and was convicted, and was sentenced to 8 years hard labour, and we lose him after that. But his children stayed in England.
That's really interesting, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, well done, everyone. I think this is great. Really
yeah. So at the end, having gone from having 12 people on WikiTree that were related within 7 degrees of relationship, we had over 1,000.
Wow.
By the time that people have been adding the new profiles, but also connecting in. And again, honourable mentions to Liz McDonald, Helen Flight, Jamin Chaka, Rosalie Neve, and Francesca Murphy, who created a load of profiles here.
Very good.
Right. Have we got Stephen back yet?
Let's see. He's there, but not there.
I am there.
Oh,
Hello.
Do you want to? Actually, that's the best voice we've had so far.
Yes.
Can we do you now?
I've switched off the camera, and that was the problem.
Right.
Much better.
Yeah.
Okay. So can you hear me?
Chambers.
Yes, I gave you your lead in with all the details that we had from the member.
Okay, so Thomas Chambers is a fascinating chap. He's a taxi driver. He lived in Paddington all his life. He died age 60. If we go through the details, he was born in 1868.
Mm-hmm.
I think we might have lost you again, Stephen.
You again. Stephen, come back.
Okay, I think we'll have to move on and wait until Stephen reconnects. So, who's the next one? John Hughes. Yeah. So, so John Hughes wasn't actually one of the profiles that was submitted by the members, but he is taken as a surrogate for his parents, Edward Hughes and Alice Charlotte Hughes. Both a married couple who were both presented as brick walls. From your member, Elizabeth, they said these were married at St James Clerkenwell, that place again, in 1806, but all the children were baptised at St Mary Whitechapel. And they thought that they were buried at the Mile End Newtown Independent Burial Ground from an address of 34 Welsh Street, Mile End. We wondered whether the starting profiles that were given were sort of like clean profiles, or had they been conflated in some way? Because from the death for Alice Charlotte Jones, it meant that she would have had to have her first baby at the age of 12, given her age at death. So that's why we chose John Hughes, who we had nice clean information from, and we thought, right, we'll work out from here and work through backwards. Unfortunately, we weren't able to find much more, as is often the case with sort of like poor working class folk in the East End. But we did connect them up to a lot of people. So they've now got 270 relatives within 7 degrees of separation.
Excellent.
But it's one of those things that we, in the England project, that we can go back and have a look at. 1 week for doing 7 profiles like this is not really enough, especially when people have obviously looked and looked and looked before. You're not pushing on an open door here.
Definitely. And if you find anything else, I'd love you to let me know, and I'll publish it in our journal. That would be great.
Yeah. Right. So that was that one, and then it was your one, Elizabeth. Mary Jenkins. Mary Jenkins, Domit Bickers. Right. So you said she's your 3rd time great grandmother.
Yes.
But through her her association with William Bickers, and she had 9 children with him. And always said that she was born in Bermondsey, Surrey, with a date of about 1820 from the censuses. So she wasn't on WikiTree either when we started. So she was created with a few relatives around her that we knew of, and she was connected by Helen Flight via the wonderfully named Horner and Hornerstone family. We're going to have another look at, because they changed their names a lot over the generations.
I'm in touch with one of their descendants, actually. So.
Right. Okay. So they've now got, Mary's now got 302 7-degree relatives on WikiTree. I'm afraid we had 2 or 3 people, including me, looking really, and we found a lot about the Domits, that our people who love the West Country, especially Malk Rowlands, that's his place. He loved all that West Country Domit action there. We found a lot about George's bankruptcy and the soap tax that he was imprisoned for avoiding paying it. Sound like Mary had a hard life. She took on George's children from his first, the first partner that we know about, Sarah Wells, and then all the children seemed to die, or she put them in a workhouse and left them. And she had children with George, but as far as we can tell, they all died as well. And we couldn't find a marriage to either man, and we couldn't find a baptism. There was a very, if it had been the baptism that we were looking for, there was a Mary Jenkins baptised in Bermondsey in 1820. But it turned out that she had a very happy life in Bermondsey. So, by the looks of it. How are you doing with your DNA on this one? Because I put suggest DNA test on this one.
Yeah, well, I've got my Horner cousin is connected to me, but nobody else so far. These are another family that I've found that did register, didn't necessarily baptise. So my own direct line here was Valentine Bickers, and he wasn't baptised. Or registered, I don't think, but he was born in 1850, so he's in the 51 census.
Yeah.
I worked on Valentine, and I know full well that I couldn't find a birth registration for him, and it was just that census that linked him to his family. Otherwise, it was difficult. But then he had, I think, I'm trying to remember. I found out quite a lot about his family, certainly.
Yeah, good. I did try. I have got a very small profile on WikiTree, and I did try and go up towards him, but I didn't manage to do it, I'm afraid. I got stuck halfway through. So yeah, so maybe I could do that another day.
Yeah. Okay. Great name, Valentine. Just wonder whether he was either born on Valentine's Day or whether, you know, there was a.
There's quite a few Valentine Bickers, all come from little villages in Suffolk.
Look, Valentine.
And his father, his grandfather, was a farmer in a little village in Suffolk that I've forgotten the name of offhand, but left a will. You know, he only had 3 spoons and a halfpenny to rub together, sort of thing. But he did have a will, so that was quite interesting. And his children are born all over the place, in Norfolk and all over the place. So more to follow up there, I think.
Yes,
I've got a link to a Bickers in Norfolk with my, I think it's with my one name study, but certainly with one of my one name studies. So it may link up to somebody that's already on there. Because I was looking at some of the Bickers in Norfolk to see if they linked up with the Suffolk ones.
Yeah, because one of Thomas's daughter was baptised there, and they very handily wrote her mother's maiden name in the register. So I feel it's got to be her, which is nice, isn't it? Them doing that at an early age.
Yeah.
yes.
Well, thank you very much for all that work. I shall have a look at that later on in depth.
Yeah.
Quite a lot to look at there.
Yeah. Right. So, Stephen back yet?
Nope, not yet.
No. Okay. So then we're on to William White, which was the last of the submitted profiles. And from your member, Elizabeth, says he was born in about 1782 in England, but we know not in Middlesex from the 1841 census. He was chemist to the Princess of Wales. He had a shop in Haymarket, which was very knobby for people that don't know London. And he died in 1849, just before the census. He wasn't on WikiTree when we started. So he was put on with, again, a small family group that we knew of, and he's now got 525 7th-degree relatives added in. He was, again, connected in with Helen Flight. Helen is one of our people who does connecting in. And she connected him in via the Stannards, and Jill Whitehouse and Anne Browning, who really have taken the lead in doing the research on this family, also connected in via the Mentz family. So yes, he was, again, somebody, considering that he was such a pillar of society, we cannot find anything about his backstory. We've contacted the Worshipful Society of Apothecaries. The archivist got back to us yesterday saying, nope, we haven't got him. We've got his son, who was apprenticed to his father. And his son, George Francis, became a surgeon. And we found lots of scandalous stuff about him. There is an insurance certificate at the London Metropolitan Archives, which gives us in the catalogue a tantalising clue that names a Thomas White on the as an interested party in the property in the Haymarket that William was owning or renting. So that might be our last sort of like lead until we just get some serendipitous, link from a will or something somewhere. Really, to say the honourable mentions here go to Jill Whitehouse, who looked at over 100 PCC wills, White wills, and Anne Browning, also from the England Project. Anne has a vibe that they come from Sussex, because John Henry Hastings, who was William's business partner, also came from Hastings as well, and also that they had money. There was also the thought that the middle names Julian and Lewis were significant here as well.
They're not common, are they, Julian and Lewis? So
No.
Mm.
Yeah. So that's him. We did find some nice pictures of the pots, though.
I was just looking at those. Yeah, aren't they great?
Yes, they're on the British Museum catalogue.
Oh,
So yes, extreme left and extreme right. So these would have been little pots. They'd scrape their ointment in and give them.
Yeah.
Give them to people.
Well, I have to say I'm very impressed because, you know, I'm chairman of the London, Westminster and Middlesex Family History Society, and I've been researching my family for an awful long time. So I do know quite a lot of what to do. And we put our heads together with all of these, and hadn't managed to get further. So thank you very much, everyone. That's fantastic. I'm going to do a lovely article from our journal about it all.
Oh, good. And we've just got one last profile to talk about, which is, you may want to add him in as well then.
Why not?
So this was Sidney Lee, the second editor of the Dictionary of National Biography. Changed his name from Solomon Lazarus Lee. Came from a strong sort of Jewish family. His great aunt Phoebe's husband was the first chief rabbi of the London synagogue, and lots of Jewish research done here. So we had lots of help from the Jewish Roots group, which was amazing. I think only this evening, Anne Browning contacted me and said that she's actually found some more grandparents. So she's going to put those on as well.
Oh, great.
Yeah. Again, honourable mentions to, apart from saying thank you to Elaine Martson from the Jewish Roots Project and Eric Weddington from the Masonic Research Group. Mount Rowlands, who came out of the West Country. I think he got quite into doing Jewish research here. Celia Marsh, Marjorie Gibbons, and Heather Jenkinson, who made a lot of the linking profiles. So that accounts for all our seven profiles.
That's been really interesting, really interesting. I think it's such a good experience as well, having everybody having a look. Many hands make light work, they say, don't they? This shows it. So.
Have we got Stephen back into the...
No, he's not.
No. Okay, I will try and talk through, because Stephen was using me as a sounding board for the research, because it just seemed to be getting bonkers and bonkers. We'd been slandering for virtually the whole week a completely innocent chap called Chambers, who lived round the corner from his mum. He was a grocer, and we say he's the daddy. He only lived just round the corner, and he turned out to be nothing to do with him at all. So we found that Thomas Chambers had his birth registered twice, once by his mother, and who was Sarah Ann Chambers. Now, Sarah Ann Chambers started off Sarah Ann Jones, and she took the name Chambers when she had her first child some 12 years beforehand, to make it look respectable. We don't know what happened to the father of that child. He was a William Edwin Chambers, and he just disappears. So she's been living as the widow Chambers, and then she gets pregnant again by a chap called Thomas Phillips, who's a bank manager or bank clerk, and that's where probably the Thomas Chambers clerk comes from. So say Thomas Chambers has his birth registered twice, once by his mother with father unknown, and then Thomas Phillips does the decent thing and gets the birth registration altered with his name on it. But as far as we can see, that's the only time that he has any input into young Thomas's life. Thomas Phillips, the father, never marries. He works his way up the banking system. He becomes the bank manager of the Union Bank on Argyle Street. He comes from a family of artisan plasterers, not just plasterers, but they do lovely shop fittings and stuff. And this is the sort of place that they were hanging out in. And Thomas Phillips lives a bachelor life. Sometimes we catch him in the census, living in at work at the bank, where he probably had a suite of rooms, but he also lodges in Furnival's Inn. Today we got the his will back, and he left nothing to his illegitimate son. They all his money, of which there was quite a lot, went to his nephew and nieces.
Interesting.
So that was his brick wall was broken with only 2 hours to go in the challenge.
Oh my gosh, it was amazing.
Yeah.
The work you guys did for this week was pretty epic.
Yeah, that's
so
really
that's
interesting.
so the Artesian pub. If you could just wheel that down a little bit there. So on the onto the pub there. So it's not the pub that Thomas lived with his mother and his sister, but it's the little
right here.
The newsagent shop. They lived above that.
Yeah, that's up here.
Yeah. So that's where we are, and I'm really sad that Stephen didn't have the connection to be able to present that, because
that's a shame. That is a
and
shame.
He's now taken it back another couple of generations as well.
Well, please pass on my heartfelt thanks to him, will you?
Yeah.
When you need to see him. So I think that's really interesting. Yeah.
Absolutely.
The things our ancestors did, to try and hide. But hey,
yes,
we will find you.
Yes. Yes, it's likely that Thomas Phillips Chambers, had absolutely no idea who his father was.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
right,
really
so
interesting.
Eowyn, you're going to show us some lovely pictures now.
I just have some graphics that show some different ways of looking at these things. Let me share that screen. So we've been talking about the 7 degrees of connections, and these graphs kind of show the before and the after. So this is where we started with Thomas Ancret. He had 110 connections already. Each circle represents a degree outward. So you have Thomas in the center, and he would be 0. And then this little square here is his first circle. We had a spouse and 3 of his children, and then a smattering of other degrees out to, we had out to 7. But we started with 110, and we finished with 479.
Wow.
So it kind of gives you a good graphic visual of what we were able to add for him. And then this shows, this is part of our WikiTree Plus. You can go in and do these maps which show the migration. So for all of the people in his CC7 that we found, this each shows where they were born and then where they died. So the red dots are where they were born and the blue dots are where they died. And then these arrows show you kind of where they, the directions that they went. So Thomas had quite a few that went to America. And then he had some down here in Australia, and quite a lot were in England. And so you can zoom in and get a closer look at those relatives here and where and how they were traveling. So we had one over here in Ireland that came over to England. So it's another way just to kind of look at the migration and where people were coming and going from. This one is Thomas Chambers. With him, we started with 7. We had his spouse, a couple children, and then just a few more. And we finished 189 for him. And then they all stayed in this area in England. We didn't find many that branched out from there.
Yeah. One of the things that Stephen said is that for a taxi driver, he spent his whole life every address that we had was
Yeah.
within a half a mile square of Paddington.
He said you could walk, it would take you like 10 minutes maybe to walk in all the places that he lived in that really small area. And then Sidney Dyer, we started with 9 connections for him and ended with 1,029. So it's fun to look at. He, obviously had quite a lot in the UK. Not many that came to America, but quite a lot that seemed to go back and forth from India and down in that area. And then we zoomed in to the UK on him, so you can kind of get a closer look there. And we had John Hughes, started with 5. We were able to get to 232 in those 7 degrees for him. And then he, again, had a lot in England, more that came over to America, a couple that down in New Zealand and Australia. And I zoom in again for him for the UK. Everybody has 1 in Ireland. Mary, we started with 5 for her, and we were able to get to 289. Here's her. Quite a lot there. A couple came or died in America. 1 down here. Several down in Australia. So we zoomed in to the UK on her.
Well, you can really see the Suffolk connection there, can't you? In Norfolk.
Yep. And then that was down in Australia for Mary. So you can kind of see where they were down there. And then William White, we started with 6 for him, and we finished at 560. He just had people going all over the place. He even had one that ended up over here on the west side of the States, and one down here by Venezuela. Maybe born on a boat, because that looks like it's in the water. That was just a zoom in there. Or this is Lee, actually, yeah. And then zoom into the States. So you can see there. He had 4 connections for Solomon. We ended at 464. And I did the White and Lee backwards. So this is actually White, William White's. He had people going everywhere. Especially all over the UK, it looks like. Even up into Scotland. So, and then here's the other thing we found that was fun. William White and Sidney Dyer actually were 7 degrees from each other.
Oh, really? Isn't that funny?
Yeah. Yep. So it was William's son's wife's sister. Her husband's brother's wife was Sidney's daughter.
Wow, that's fascinating.
So that was just a little interesting tidbit that we found.
Wow.
So yeah,
That's really interesting.
There's a lot of different ways you can look at this stuff on WikiTree and different viewpoints and migration and all that good stuff. So
yeah, they're really interesting. I didn't know about those, so I'll have a good look at those. So, and I'll try a bit harder to get some of my family on.
Yeah, the more family you have, the better those tools are.
Yeah. We did have a chap called Neil was it last year, I think, he wrote us a really nice article about WikiTree, and that encouraged me to have a bit of a go, but I've just been busy. You know how it is with us genealogists. We're always busy, aren't we, doing something? So yeah, I'll make more of an effort and put a bit more on there.
Always.
Yep.
Well, I want to thank you, Elizabeth, for letting us do this stuff, work for you. We had a lot of fun. It was a fun week.
Yeah, really nice. Thank you very much, everyone.
And thank you, Joe, for being a fantastic team captain.
Thank you.
And thank you to all of the participants. You guys did great work.
Yeah, so yes, very much thanks to everybody who was a member of the challenge team. And we had, nearly 70 people? Over 70
about
people?
70 people worked
Yep.
on that, yeah. So.
Yeah, it's amazing. I'm writing notes here. I'm definitely going to do an article about this in our journal in December.
Oh, wonderful. That's great. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you very much, everyone. That was fantastic. Really
Right.
interesting.
All right. I think we'll go ahead and sign off then.
Right. Thanks, Owen.
Thanks, Joe.